They are mothers, daughters, sisters, fathers, sons, and brothers.
Mr. President.
They are...
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
The senators impugn the motives and conduct of our colleague from Alabama as warned by the chair. Senator Warren, quote, said Senator Sessions has used the awesome power of his office to chill the free exercise of the vote by black citizens. I call the senator to order under the provisions of Rule 19.
The Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I am surprised that the words of Coretta Scott King are not suitable for debate in the United States Senate. I ask leave of the Senate to continue my remarks.
Is there objection?
Object.
I appeal the ruling.
Objection is heard. The senator will take her seat.
You're listening to The Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. Delighted you were with us. We have a lot to get through today, and we will do it. Politics, the culture, everything in between. Wow, this is something. When you have Elizabeth Warren reading from letters clearly impugning the motive of a sitting senator, he's disgraceful. It's despicable. He's an awful, rotten person, said Ted Kennedy when he was on the Senate floor. Whether or not he was drunk, it's not clear, but I'm going to quote him anyway. Because Ted Kennedy said it? I mean, years and years ago? Back in the 80s? It's okay to say it?
I appeal the ruling.
Objection is heard. The senator will take her seat.
So what did she do? She, of course, got off the Senate floor and then streamed her remarks on Facebook Live, and now on YouTube, I guess it's millions and millions of hits. Her initial speech on the Senate floor, which you didn't hear there, but she started to read these letters, and there's a rule of decorum where you're not supposed to impugn the integrity of the motives of your fellow senators. And I think it's not fair because everybody calls me or compares me to Ruth Buzzy, and that's not. I don't really get upset about that, and I don't even have a handbag or a hairnet like that. I'm watching this last night. I'm thinking to myself, this is what it's come to. And a couple of things I would say about this. And I want to hear what you have to say as well about this, because I actually think the more Elizabeth Warren speaks on the Senate floor, the better for us. So I understand what Mitch McConnell was getting at there, but why cut her off? I would have allowed her to speak. Just let her speak. I mean, I think she's inordinately ineffective. I think she turns men off. Sorry. I think male voters think about Elizabeth Warren, and any amorous thoughts they had about anything else just rushes right out of their heads. I mean, I'm sorry, but I just think she does not have a compelling persona or an attractive persona. I'm not talking about looks. I'm talking about demeanor. So if you're Mitch McConnell and you want to be sealing the narrative here for the Republicans that we are an inclusive party, will entertain all voices, even those who are making total jackasses of themselves like Elizabeth Warren, then let her speak. And you might even comment on it afterward and say, I could have actually invoked a rule that is rarely invoked, but you could arguably say applies to what you just said, Senator Warren. But because I think the country really needs to hear how degraded the debate has become, I let you finish. But I digress, because Jeff Sessions will be the next Attorney General for all people, men, women, no matter where you came from. If you're in this country, you're an American citizen, you're a naturalized citizen, you're legally here, you have nothing to fear if you follow the rule of law, because Jeff Sessions is on the side of the rule of law. We're not for shutting down debate. We're not for limiting the right of individuals to speak out and speak freely, even when, frankly, the language is quite unfair, distortionary, and itself demeaning. to this body and to this institution. But do you agree with me that the more Elizabeth Warren speaks, the better off Republicans are? 855-40-LAURA. I personally believe that's the case. I am begging the Democrats to nominate Elizabeth Warren in 2020. You thought Hillary was fun. Oh, just let her run, and don't say, oh, well, she's closer to the Democrat base than Hillary was. She doesn't have all that corporatist baggage trailing her along behind her. I said, absolutely not. I think she represents the radical left that most people in America are tired of. I think people are tuning a lot of this stuff out. Are you tuning it out? All these interviews, the cable news. If I were advising Trump, you know what I'd tell him to do? I'd say, tune it out, man. I'd turn off all the TVs in the White House. I'd tune it out. I just tune it out and just go about your business, engage with the American people, have your narrative set, amplify your message through the types of events you want to do, bringing various diverse voices into the White House, having events that educate the American people, doing interviews when they suit you. But don't let all the static and the left wing shenanigans and all the nonsense that is morning, noon, and night on cable news. I mean, just let it go. And let her go. Let Elizabeth Warren go. I think the more you see these people as desperate and deflecting as they've become, and dismissive of the concerns of everyday Americans as they are, the better for the better for Republicans and the better for the country, because it's been in many ways a slow wake-up call to politicians. Some politicians will never get it. Obviously, a lot of them are Democrats. Not all, but most of them. But I think the people are so far ahead of where most pundits, most news anchors, most political consultants are. The people see through this, especially when you have a powerful and strong communications wing working inside the White House to produce the narrative that is more true and more accurate than anything you will ever see on cable news. So if I'm advising Donald Trump, I know you like to watch the cables, I'd turn it off. I'd focus on tax reform, repealing and replacing Obamacare, getting this border wall built, other executive orders that lead us to more deregulation of regulations that have been hampering business growth in this country. I would focus on those big and very popular issues. Tune it out, turn it off, because I will tell you, most Americans are. Do you agree with me? 855-40-LAURA. The more we hear from Pocahontas, the better off the country will be. She's easily caricatured. She's easily dismissed, because the more she speaks, the less convincing she becomes. She is going to whine 24/7 about how the little guy is being ignored in the Trump administration and how women aren't getting their fair shake. And meanwhile, she and her cohorts do everything they can to shut down the voices of women who disagree with them, of minorities who disagree with their worldview, on whether it's applauding things that are happening on college campuses or fomenting this constant resistance mentality that hurts real advancement for this country. When I hear congressmen, Democrat congressmen, talking about resistance, they're using resistance in tweets. We must resist. This is the resistance. It sounds like they're operating in a foreign country, doesn't it? You're listening to The Laura Ingraham Show. 855-40-LAURA. Elizabeth Warren shut down by Mitch McConnell. And I think this is actually one of Mitch McConnell's rare strategic mistakes. Let her speak. Let the left speak, because they bury themselves day after day, week after week, month after month. We're winning on the issues. I have a few interesting new snapshots of public opinion to share with you when we come back that indicate that on these big issues, Trump's agenda wins. We'll talk about that when we come back. Senator Tom Cotton is going to join us from the great state of Arkansas. He will share with us his new view on what should happen with legal immigration. Do you think that 1 million people a year, that's just legally coming into the United States, doesn't include work visas and so forth, but legally coming into the United States, becoming green card holders, able to come in here legally, do you think that number should be cut? He believes it should be cut in half. Do you agree with him? 855-40-LAURA. A lot more to get to on your healthy radio addiction.
You were what I wish to see.
I appeal the rule.
Elizabeth.
I appeal the ruling.
Objection is heard. The senator will take her seat.
I appeal the ruling of the chair, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Okay, you want to keep your favorite podcasts like this one free to download, right? Well, then all you have to do is complete a short, anonymous survey, which takes less than 5 minutes. Just go to podcastone.com/mysurvey to answer the questions. You can also get there by clicking the banner at podcastone.com. If you've done this in the past, we'd like to thank you, but we do need you to do it again because we want to make sure we're giving you what you want. That's podcastone.com/mysurvey or click the banner at podcastone.com.
But nice she ain't. She's a dame with more love to give than...
I listened to her for quite a while, and she didn't have a good thing to say about a fellow senator here. And I frankly don't think that's right. That's the thing that really bothers me. Everybody on the other side knows that we have the votes to finally do this. And yet they're treating it as though this is a cause célèbre that they've got to try and win, which they're not going to win. And in the process, treating a fellow senator with disdain. It's wrong.
She ain't.
You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. Donald Trump is speaking about the travel ban in Washington now at some type of event. Let's listen in.
And for such period as he shall deem necessary. So here it is. People coming in. Suspend the entry of all aliens. Right? That's what it says. It's not like, again, a bad high school student would understand this. Anybody would understand this. Suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants. Or impose on the entry of aliens. Okay, so you can suspend the aliens, right? You can suspend the aliens from coming in. Very strong. Or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. Okay. So you can suspend, you can put restrictions, you can do whatever you want. And this is for the security of the country, which, again, you're the chiefs, you're the sheriffs. You understand this. And I listened to lawyers on both sides last night, and they were talking about things that had just nothing to do with it. I listened to a panel of judges, and I'll comment on that. I will not comment on the statements made by certainly one judge. But I have to be honest that if these judges wanted to, in my opinion, help the court in terms of respect for the court, they do what they should be doing. I mean, it's so sad. They should be, when you read something so simple and so beautifully written and so perfectly written, other than the one statement, of course, having to do with he or she. But when you read something so perfectly written and so clear to anybody, and then you have lawyers, and I watched last night in amazement, and I heard things that I couldn't believe. Things that really had nothing to do with what I just read. And I don't ever want to call a court biased, so I won't call it biased. And we haven't had a decision yet. But courts seem to be so political, and it would be so great for our justice system if they would be able to read a statement and do what's right. And that has to do with the security of our country, which is so important. Right now, we are at risk because of what happened. General Kelly is an extremely talented man and a very good man. Now Secretary Kelly, Homeland Security. We are doing our job. He's a great man. We're doing our job.
We'll go back to this as necessary, but clearly Donald Trump very frustrated with what he observed in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals hearing yesterday. I listened to most of it. I had to be on special report. Are the appearances on Facebook, Drew? The appearance last night on special report is on Facebook as well as Hannity, so you can watch that. I had one of those little tiny trucks come to my house last night at 10 o'clock at night. That's a brutal day. 7 a.m. leave my house. 7 p.m. do special report, do radio in between, write part of my book in the afternoon, and then do a 10 p.m. TV hit. I can't believe I can put two sentences together at 10 p.m., but nevertheless. I watched the oral argument, and to me it really confirmed why we need a judiciary that does not second-guess the national security conclusions of the President of the United States. And we'll play the first soundbite. This is from Judge Friedland. I have not had a chance to listen to this soundbite, so forgive me if it's not set correctly. Let's listen.
Has the government pointed to any evidence connecting these countries with terrorism?
These proceedings have been moving very fast. The strongest point on that is that in 2015 and 2016, both Congress and the administration made determinations that these 7 countries posed the greatest risk of terrorism, and in doing so, restricted visa waiver to people who had even traveled to those countries over the last 5 or 6 years. The executive order relies on that determination.
Well, what the judges did is they jumped in on the issue of inferring that Muslims, well, shouldn't we infer that Muslims were really the target of all this? So we'll play it next. We'll play it maybe next block or for. We'll take a break on the Laura Ingraham Show. Tom Cotton is going to join us. We'll talk more about this when we come back. But Donald Trump met with sheriffs from all across the country yesterday, heard from them about the concerns of illegal immigration, border enforcement, and the like. There was a hearing on Capitol Hill at the Homeland Security Committee as well before Mike McCall. And now Trump addressing the court case, Ninth Circuit, set to rule any moment. This case will undoubtedly go to the Supreme Court unless the administration pulls the executive order, reforms it, perhaps rewrites it, and makes this whole thing moot. We'll take a break. Tom Cotton up next.
Senator Sessions was an early and energetic supporter of then-candidate Donald Trump, and the senator played a key role in shaping what has become the most extreme, most divisive, and most dangerous immigration policies of any president in decades. Senator Sessions' radical views are not limited to immigration.
You are listening to the Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. Elizabeth Warren went on and on and on. The most interesting part of her stand-up, I call it a stand-up routine, was when she called Senator Sessions a disgrace. Yeah, this was about 4 hours and 45 minutes into the extravaganza yesterday. And it was at about 4:20 p.m. Pacific time. So it was 7:30 Eastern time. And she thought she was going to be really cute by reading from a statement that was made by Ted Kennedy, and then by reading a letter that was written by Tom Cotton about what a horrible, awful, evil person Jeff Sessions was. And she actually started reading it, and she actually used the word disgrace, which is actually against the Senate rules. Joining us now, Senator Tom Cotton from the great state of Arkansas, who introduced with Senator Perdue yesterday a very common sense bill called Reforming American Immigration for Strong Employment Act, otherwise known as the RAISE Act. We're going to talk about that and this spectacle last night on the Senate floor. Senator Cotton, it is great to talk to you. How are you, sir?
Hey, Laura. I'm doing well. It's great to be back on your show.
So before we get into the RAISE Act, which I love, what happened yesterday with Elizabeth Warren, and what is your reaction to her tactic of reading the letters of one Democrat lion, of course, Ted Kennedy, beloved by the Democrats, another, the wife of Martin Luther King Jr., both, of course, highly critical and, in one way, a pejorative way, of Jeff Sessions. She ultimately lost her ability to speak because Senator McConnell cited the rules issue on the floor.
Well, Laura, we have very strenuous debates in the Senate. We have very sharp disagreements. We represent very different kinds of states and different kinds of people. That's all understandable. But we always expect to maintain a basic level of civility and professional conduct. There's an actual rule that says you cannot impugn the character of another senator. You can be as tough as you want on their views or their actions, but their actual character is off limits. And I think that's appropriate on the Senate floor. Elizabeth Warren last night didn't just read letters from other people. She's trying to make it seem like it's only quoting Coretta Scott King. She repeatedly, even after warnings, continued to imply that Jeff Sessions was a racist or wanted to take us back to the old days of Jim Crow or didn't care about his fellow Americans. After repeated warnings, Senator McConnell appropriately made a motion to sanction her under the Senate rules, which prohibits her from speaking any further on this debate. Certainly the first time it's happened in my 2 years in the Senate. I've spoken to some of the old bulls, and they say they can't remember the last time it happened. But Senator Warren really did cross the line last night, and the Senate sanctioned her appropriately.
What about the thought that it just makes Elizabeth Warren into this bigger persona? And most people wouldn't have probably even paid attention to what she said. Now she's had millions and millions of people watching her on Facebook Live and YouTubing her statement that I just quoted from.
Well, if the Democrats want to make Elizabeth Warren the leader of their party, I would be perfectly happy with that, and we'll see how that works out for them in 2018 and 2020.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm begging for that to happen. Senator Cotton, I'm like, please let Elizabeth Warren be the nominee in 2020. Let's talk about the court case last night. I had the chance to listen to most of it. I know you probably heard snippets from it at the very least. Where do you think the administration goes from here, assuming the Ninth Circuit does not lift the stay that was imposed by the district court? What would you advise them to do? Folks, and I'm one of them, said maybe it's time to redo that executive order, make it a little more clear, and maybe rescind the previous one and reissue another one that would be perhaps a little bit less likely to raise the hackles of the leftists out on the Ninth Circuit or any of the other circuits.
I think that's one path, Laura. But first off, the Ninth Circuit should overturn the trial judge's restraining order. That opinion didn't deserve the name. In fact, you might call it a so-called opinion because it didn't have any legal analysis. It did not have a single reason that President Trump's order on refugee travel was unconstitutional or illegal. And that's because the order, in my opinion, plainly is lawful. The president is granted significant discretion under federal law to determine who is enabled to come into this country for security-based reasons. All that said, the Ninth Circuit is one of the notoriously liberal courts in this country. They're the ones that said you can't have the Ten Commandments on public spaces, and many other things that have been struck down repeatedly by the Supreme Court. But since this is merely an order from the president to the executive branch directing them how to employ the discretion vested in him by federal law, not a law, if the Ninth Circuit refuses to act, then President Trump could modify his order in a way that makes clear some of the clarifications that followed afterwards as it applies to, say, green card holders, and that addresses the concerns that the state of Washington and the state of Minnesota expressed in their lawsuit. If he does that, and those states still object, then they really are just basically taking the position that we cannot have borders and that everyone in the world has a constitutional right to travel to the United States. That is plainly not the law, and it is plainly unpopular with the American people. So that would be one path for the president to take if he wants to immediately begin to keep this country safe from potential threats traveling to it, and give the Department of Homeland Security the time and the space they need to review our security procedures that are in place, which is the point of this temporary pause in travel in the first place.
Well, I think that the Ninth Circuit is likely to do what the Ninth Circuit usually does, which is get it wrong, and then we'll be then we'll be in Anthony Kennedy's hands, because he's in charge of the Ninth Circuit, unless he sends it to the full 9 justices, which is also possible. All right, let's move on to the immigration question in general. And you point out in your I think you've sent out a release around your new proposal with the RAISE Act that America has averaged about 1 million immigrants annually, and just give us some context of 1 million people. We have about 350 million people now in the United States of America. At least about 20 million are probably here illegally.
About 325 million Americans. We've been admitting 1 million immigrants every single year for decades. So the population of Montana every year, the population of Arkansas every 3 years. The vast majority of those immigrants, 14 out of 15 immigrants, do not come here because of their demonstrated job skills or education levels or language ability and an ability to succeed in their economy. So the legislation we proposed yesterday is targeted, but very important. It would simply get a handle on non-employment-based green cards that go out every year. So we'd say that we will reunite immediate families, spouses, and unmarried minor children, but we will stop unlimited chain migration of extended families. We'll cap the refugee program at 50,000, where it was just a few years ago under President Obama before his last-minute surge in 2016. And 3, we'll eliminate the diversity lottery, which is outdated, serves no economic or humanitarian purpose, and really doesn't even promote that much diversity given the way it works today.
Diversity? Can you explain what that is, Senator Cotton? What is the diversity? For some reason, audio is playing in my headset. So I'm sorry, Senator. But what is...
Well, it's just... So... You take all the other immigration programs we have, whether it's family reunification or refugee programs or employment-based programs, and you add them all up and you look at where they all come from, which today is predominantly East Asia and Latin America, and then we give an extra 55,000 visas a year to the underrepresented parts of the world just to have more balance. Right now, the way it's working in practice is those green cards go to African nations and, surprisingly, European nations. So we have a diversity lottery that is going to a bunch of Europeans. That just doesn't make it makes no sense. It serves no purpose for the American people, and I think it should be eliminated. And Laura, I'd have to point out that almost every one of these proposals have been part of past failed efforts of comprehensive legislation, which is to say open borders, amnesty-style legislation, because even those people realize the diversity lottery serves no purpose, and that unlimited family chain migration also serves no purpose. And the effect of it is simply to drive down wages for people who work with their hands and work on their feet, people with a high school diploma or less, because if those 14 out of 15 immigrants were, say, advanced high-skilled scientists, if they were software programmers, if they were professional athletes or musicians, they could come here under employment-based programs. They don't.
Can I ask you a question, and you might have the answer to this. It's befuddled me for some time. You know, I've been around Washington since about 1986, 7, I guess. 6, 7. And I have noticed, and everyone else around me has noticed, that the immigration from countries like Pakistan and it's mostly Pakistan and I guess Somalia, other countries, has just skyrocketed, and it's legal immigration. Great people. I've met a lot of wonderful people, but I say, well, so do you have your family here? Oh yeah, my 7 brothers, my parents are here, my grandparents are here. I said, when did you come over? Well, we came over and. Some of us came over in the late 80s, and then others came over in the 90s. It's like we're relocating entire neighborhoods, it seems, in some parts of the world into Northern Virginia, Sterling, Virginia, Arlington, Virginia, Fairfax County, Manassas. Like, what? How is that happening? Is that part of the family process, or George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush after the Kuwait War? I mean, what was it?
it's primarily through extended family reunification, Laura. Sometimes it's part of the refugee program, but primarily extended family reunification, because once a single immigrant gets to this country for whatever reason, whether they're a refugee, whether they're a professional athlete, whether they're a farm worker, once they get here and get a green card, they are entitled under federal law, not just to bring their spouse and their minor unmarried children, but their adult children, their spouses, their siblings, their adult parents. And then once those people get here, they are entitled to bring the same people. So there really is no limit on the amount of immigration that comes here under family reunification. It's only the ability of the immigration bureaucracies to process it in any given year. And that means that you don't just have individuals coming to this country. You have their families, you have their villages, you have their clans, you have their entire tribes. Again, without any consideration of their ability to succeed in our economy or to contribute to our economy in a way that we can't find American citizens to do so.
Yeah, it's really wild because it's importing an entire new cultural understanding, and sometimes it enriches our society greatly, and I think that's great. But in other cases, what we seem to have done is cultivate a sense of separatism, a lack of real assimilation, and in many cases, a sense among a lot of these folks that my homeland is somewhere else. And I talked to a lot of these folks, and they, well, tell me what you're doing for the summer. Well, I'm going home. And I would say, well, wait a second, I'm going to my home country. I'm going home. And I said, well, wait, you're an American citizen. Oh, yeah. But home is always somewhere else. And I know people talk about the home country, and that's been done in generations past, but I don't know, something about it just seems different this time. There's not this assimilation required by the schools or civic patriotism taught in the schools. So it's strange, and I don't think in many cases it works all that well.
Well, we're a nation of immigrants, Laura, but many people misunderstand the history of immigration in this country. It's not the story of the beginning of our country with an unrelenting and ever-rising flow of immigrants into this country. It's a story of waves and pauses. We had the great first wave of Irish immigration in the 19th century, and then there was a long pause. We had the second great wave from South and Eastern Europe from the 1880s to the 1920s, and since 1965, it's largely been from the rest of the world. So that in our history, we have a series of waves of immigration, and then there's a pause. So those immigrants can assimilate into our society, so they can learn the language skills and job skills they need to succeed in the economy, so they can become upwardly mobile. If we just continue to have mass levels of immigration every single year, the very people we're hurting are the previous generation of immigrants who are most likely to face more competition for the very same jobs they're working today. So I would say that my legislation is both pro-immigration and pro-immigrant. It simply recognizes that our economy today does not need this mass influx of 1 million-plus workers every single year.
Well, I appreciate it so much, and I hope the administration is going to be working with you. We have about 15 seconds, but any word from them about whether they support this or not?
We've worked very closely with senior administration officials. I spoke with the president yesterday. He strongly supports the concept of moving towards a merit-based immigration system, so we look forward to working closely with them.
Senator Tom Cotton, thank you so much. From Arkansas, the RAISE Act. We'll be talking more about this in the coming weeks. We'll take a break. Stay with us. What real, honest tax reform will look like on Polizet and media's fake news becoming Ayatollah's propaganda, all on LifeZet. Download the app.
Your healthy radio addiction starts now.
Power to the people!
The Laura Ingraham Show.
Blacks, hatchet face, eagle nose, like those Indians. I'm an Indian too.
Mr. Hebert also stated that Mr. Sessions suggested that a prominent white civil rights lawyer who litigated voting rights cases was a disgrace to his race for doing it. It is inconceivable to me that a person of this attitude is qualified to be a U.S. attorney, let alone a U.S. federal judge. He is, I believe, a disgrace to the Justice Department, and he should withdraw his nomination and resign his position.
The senator is reminded that it is a violation of Rule 19 of the standing rules of the Senate to impute to another senator or senators any conduct or motive unworthy or becoming a senator.
Mr. President, I don't think I quite understand. I'm reading a letter from Coretta Scott King to the Judiciary Committee from 1986 that was admitted into the record. I'm simply reading what she wrote about what the nomination of Jeff Sessions to be a federal court judge meant and what it would mean in history for her.
This is a reminder, not pertinent necessarily what you just shared. However, you stated that a sitting senator is a disgrace to the Department of Justice.
Takes one to know
I think that may have been Senator Kent.
And this,
although I would be glad to repeat it in my own words.
I'm an Indian too.
Well, she knows something about what a disgrace is. Well, it's a disgrace to be owned by the far left. It's a disgrace to be heading a resistance movement when the country has voted for real change. They didn't vote for this. They don't want this. On the one hand, I think Mitch McConnell, who ultimately came in and shut her down. On the one hand, I mean, it's nice finally to have Elizabeth Warren shut down, but it kind of gave her a moment to run out to the cameras, which she did. She ran on with of course, the go-to show, Rachel Maddow, and then she did a Facebook Live where she read the entire letter. Jeff Sessions is a total disgrace, and if you don't like it, I'm going to hit you with my pocketbook. Don Lemon or Maddow, whatever. She's on all these shows. And she wants to be the victim. See, she's the strong, pioneering, trailblazing woman. Yet what she really prefers to be in this moment in time is a victim.
I read the letter because Coretta Scott King, in her letter, had discussed what Jeff Sessions had done while he was the U.S. attorney for Alabama. And she walks through his prosecution of civil rights workers, what it was that Jeff Sessions did to the black vote. And
I can't.
This is not.
Yeah, oh, please. And she knows she's going to lose this because Jeff Sessions will be confirmed handily, and no problem. He's going to get confirmed. This was just about Elizabeth Warren. This is about raising her profile. So I would say is that Mitch McConnell probably helped her raise her profile. But as Tom Cotton said on the show earlier, if that's what they want the face of the Democrat Party to be, bring it on. Happy to have her as the face of the Democrat Party. 855-40-LAURA. We'll get to all your calls. Fascinating new piece of legislation introduced by Tom Cotton to cut immigration in half and go back to a merit-based immigration in this country. Given what we've had with this wild family chain migration, where you have adult siblings of individuals who came here perhaps on work visas, became permanent residents, became citizens, then suddenly their 6 brothers and 4 sisters are also in the country. And that makes no sense. And that does not lead to better assimilation or better outcomes for the United States. I think Senator Cotton is absolutely correct on this. And 500,000 immigrants makes a lot more sense, and look to really inject some common sense into the reason that people come into the country, why we want them to come, and what they can bring into the United States, because immigration can be a very powerful tool for advancement and productivity. Oh, by the way, the New York Times, it's no surprising. How to Make America Greater by Eduardo Porter. Allow more immigration. A freer flow of labor would make the economic pie bigger. Well, we've had more economic immigrants also come into the country than ever before. More people coming to supposedly work. And how have wages gone up? Exactly how has our productivity over the last, let's just go over the last 8 years, increased with all this immigration that, well, certainly Barack Obama wanted. And a lot of it was brought in. Even by the way, even the New York Times has to admit in this piece where they essentially sign on to Hillary's open markets, open borders, is that they said, well, that is not to say America's borders should be open to all comers. This is, you have to go to the jump page for this. Whatever the economic benefits, immigration remains a touchy topic everywhere. A poll by the Pew Research Center in 2010 found that 3 in 4 Americans favored tighter restrictions on immigration. So did 66% of Germans, 77% of Venezuelans, and 89% of South Africans. And who knows what would happen to productivity and wages, to politics and social cohesion if immigration took off at an unprecedented scale? Well, yeah. A third of adults in sub-Saharan Africa say they would like to migrate permanently. So would a fifth of Latin Americans and 1 in 10 South and East Asians, according to the Gallup World Poll. About a quarter of these potential migrants, 145 million adults, would like to live in the United States. Oh, great, just come on in. But that still leaves space for moderate liberalization. Oh, God. So it's 145 million. We have 325 million people in the United States now. 145 million want to come in. But remember what Joe Biden and Barack Obama said. Remember, they're American and everything except a piece of paper. Well, those are for the illegal immigrants already here, but that could apply to the guys from sub-Saharan Africa who are online every day and they're reading all the American websites. And why don't they count as people who are American and everything except a piece of paper? Let's go to George in New Jersey, line 1. George, welcome.
Well, thank you, Laura. Speaking of assimilation, why do we not require anybody who becomes a citizen to renounce their citizenship from where they're coming from? They always seem to have like a backup plan. If they don't like it here, or if they're going to be drafted or whatever, they have a backup plan to leave and simply go back to where they came from. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that the loyalty oath I think it's inferred into the citizenship. When you take the oath of citizenship, you're taking an oath to be part of this great American understanding and this great American experiment. And I should know it by heart, but I don't. My producer will look it up for me so I can read the citizenship oath. But I think that's a great point. I mean, Donald Trump touched on that, yet he was really criticized for that. He said we want people who love this country, who love it. And we don't want people to come into the United States who believe that there's another code that is sacrosanct, that is higher than the constitutional understanding, the understanding of the Declaration of Independence. And, of course, that brings up Sharia law and what we're seeing in some parts of the country where there's an adherence to Sharia principles, which are, frankly, fairly new principles. In Islam as well. But, the citizenship oath, I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure, reject, all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty of whom or which I have heretofore been a subject or citizen, that I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America. Well, you're pretty much saying that you're swearing off your other country. And doesn't mean you don't have affection and doesn't mean you don't have great feeling from the country of your birth, but America comes first. I don't like the dual citizenship either. I never have. It's convenient for a lot of people. But, I think you have to, the oath goes on, obviously, but the principles of the oath, when you go to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, now you bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and you would bear arms on behalf of the United States when required by law to do so. You'd perform non-combatant service in the armed forces of the United States when required by law, or you'd perform work of national importance under civilian direction when required by law. We've had people come into the country who've been naturalized citizens who've taken up arms against the country. They've become radicalized online we have people who are born here in the United States who've taken up arms against the United States. We've had Americans, not of Islamic any Islamic background at all do so. But we've also had people like, the Fort Hood shooter and Major Hassan. We've had Omar Mateen. We've had the San Bernardino killing. We've had all this. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Show, 855-40-LAURA. Let's go to Tom in Michigan, line 2. Tom.
Yeah, I'd like to see immigration just stop for a number of years. We're getting enough people over here, and it's just like if you and I were neighbors and there was a fence between us, and every week I took my trash and I threw it over your side of the fence. That's what these countries are doing. They're dumping all their trash in our country, and we have to feed them, house them, pay for their illegitimate kids, and they wonder why they can't fix the roads and the bridges.
Well, I think there's a lot of animosity that is rising in the United States. And it's unfortunate because the folks that are here and working hard and they have their heads down, they love this country from all over the world, and we've all met them. And they're great people, and they add a lot to the country. Those people and other legal immigrants have their own standing questioned because we allow people to come into the country who game the system, who are here illegally, who help, I think without a doubt, lower wages for those working class people who, frankly led pretty decent lives before this mass crush of globalization and mass immigration of the legal and illegal variety. So we can do immigration that makes sense, but a pause on immigration, I understand where people are coming from on that. I don't know if that's feasible, but I think at the very least, Donald Trump's going to make sure people understand, as Tom Cotton did when he came on the show, people are going to understand now why this immigration got totally out of control in the United States. That family chain migration is one of the biggest scams. The student visas that people overstay and they never leave the country, that's another big problem. The tourist visas that are gamed, we have lots of visa overstays, it continues to be a problem. That is ridiculous. We can track people who come in and make sure they leave, but can't go on like it's going on right now. And by the way, with the refugee program, the dropping of refugees in rural America, they're seeking to transform rural America as well, which was conservative, and mom and pop places are being replaced by communities that frankly have no understanding of or appreciation of the history and culture of that part of the country, whether it's Fargo, North Dakota, or down in Chesapeake, Virginia, or up in near Burlington, Vermont. We've seen the same thing year after year. We've changed San Bernardino County. We've changed Broward County in Florida. We've changed Fairfax County in Virginia. And rural counties are dealing with the same darn thing. And it's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. 855-40-LAURA. We got military problems as well. Trump's going to get on this veterans issue, and I think that's going to be so positive for so many people. We have a lot more to talk about. We're going to get into all of it. A former clerk for Judge Neil Gorsuch is going to stop by, talk about that confirmation hearing, which I don't know when that's going to be. I don't know if it's even scheduled yet, but we'll talk about that with him and your calls. 855-40-LAURA. You're listening to the Laura Ingraham Show. Let's go to Karen in Michigan. Very interesting ideas from Tom Cotton and David Perdue. And they're working with the White House on a new piece of legislation called the RAISE Act, which would have the number of people coming into this country legally. And it makes a lot of sense. Could I have my sheet on the RAISE Act, please, Drew? This is an example of a substantive rollout of an idea that ends up educating the American people. A generation-long influx of low-skilled labor has been a major factor in the downward pressure on the wages of working Americans, with wages of recent immigrants hardest hit. Wages for Americans with only high school diplomas have declined by 2% since the late 70s, and those who didn't finish high school, they've declined nearly 20%. The collapse in wages threatens to create a near-permanent underclass for whom the American dream is always just out of reach. And part of the solution is this RAISE Act, prioritizing immediate family households. One individual comes into the United States for a legal purpose of work or a refugee status. An immediate relative could join, but not this chain migration, which makes no sense. Let's go to Kurt in Kentucky on line 4. Kurt is focusing on, well, I think part of what the Democrats are really all about right now, which is 2018 and 2020. Kurt.
Right. Trump's going to lose his mandate if we don't get organized now. We need to go after the vulnerable seats. We need to get rid of any Republicans that aren't playing ball. But, if we can't change the D to an R, maybe we get rid of the incumbent and get somebody else in there.
Well,
and, they're going to throw...
Well, they're doing it. This is about 2018. Elizabeth Warren is about 2018. They're not stopping any of these nominees. And they'll ultimately lose this executive order case, I believe. I mean, it might take a while, but they're not going to win that either. It's not about that. It's never about the thing. It's about the next thing. But you're absolutely right. They're organizing. They're getting their email lists, which is why, in part, I think what Trump needs to do is tune it out and turn it off. I wouldn't even focus on what the media are saying. I wouldn't go on every television show. I wouldn't send my surrogates on every television show. Sometimes it's all too much. Kellyanne Conway was on with Jake Tapper for 20 minutes yesterday. 20 minutes? Who thinks that is ever going to end up to be a great thing? I mean, why help CNN? You're just giving CNN 20 minutes of stuff to slice and dice and use against you in the future. I think Kellyanne did fine. But all they're going to do for 20 minutes is say, okay, he said this, that's not true. He said this, that's not true. What do you say about that? That's going to be the entire interview. He's demonizing the press. Isn't that dangerous? We did cover the terrorist attacks. Isn't that right? I don't see what that gets you. I think it would be much better if the administration focused on doing the things that they said they were going to do, and they're off to a great start. Move on to tax reform, move on to the repeal and replace of Obamacare, do these executive order rollouts in a methodical way, and I think it's all going to be great. Do you agree with me that Trump should tune it out, turn it off and tune it out, and focus right on these major issues? 855-40-LAURA. Stay with us.
Hi guys, it's Jack Vanek from the Lady Gang. If you like mimosas and having a bunch of girl talk, why are you not listening to the Lady Gang? We are your one-stop shop for all your lady talk. New episodes are out every Tuesday on iTunes or podcast1.com.
Release your love to me. You never ever have to die.
Do you still own one of those timeshares? Oh, did this year's maintenance fees rise again? That is tough to swallow. And I know it doesn't seem like there's any other way to escape these crooked contracts. Well, my friends, if you want to get out of your timeshare, I suggest that you contact my friends at Resort Release. Yeah, I've done my research on them, and they have Better Business Bureau accredited. In fact, they have an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, and at this point, they've helped over 18,000 families just like yours get out of these horrible timeshare contracts. Now, these are friends that you can trust. And they give all customers a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you don't get out of your timeshare, you don't pay a dime, period. So I know you might regret paying those 2017 maintenance fees, but mention my name, Laura, and you will get a $500 credit back when enrolling in their services. Just go to resortrelease.com or call them at 855-66-LAURA. That's 855-66-LAURA. And listen, if you finally want to get out of this timeshare, just visit resortrelease.com today.
The nomination of Judge Gorsuch is a huge gift to the giant corporations and wealthy individuals who have stolen a Supreme Court seat in order to make sure that the justice system works for them.
It's a very hostile appointment. If you breathe air, drink water, eat food, take medicine, or in any other way interact with the courts, this is a very bad decision.
Oh, my God. We have Nancy Pelosi and Elizabeth Warren on the warpath, pun intended, against Neil Gorsuch. He's an appellate court judge on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and we are delighted that he's the nominee, and he will get confirmed. But nevertheless, the Democrats are going to try to bloody him up as much as possible. Even Dianne Feinstein yesterday had to say that she was impressed by him after her meeting with Judge Gorsuch. Tom Cotton and others meeting with him today as he does his rounds on Capitol Hill. And this is the seat, of course, that was open because of the death of Antonin Scalia, which is still remains such a huge loss for the Supreme Court. Joining us now is a former law clerk for Judge Gorsuch, Tim Meyer. He's a professor of law at Vanderbilt University, and he focuses on international issues as he teaches the young legal minds of today. Tim, how are you? Good to talk to you.
I'm well, Laura. Thanks. How are you?
I'm great. Is it weird to hear the negativity and the nastiness coming from the likes of Elizabeth Warren and Nancy Pelosi about a man, Judge Gorsuch, that you know so well?
I think it's always strange when you know somebody as well as I know Judge Gorsuch, and as many people know him, to hear somebody kind of dragged through and caricatured in the way that he's been caricatured by some opponents of his nomination. He's a kind and decent guy. He's one of the greatest mentors I've ever had, and so it's as a friend and a former law clerk, it's sad to hear some of the things that are said about him.
When you go back and you listen to what the Democrats were saying last year after Justice Scalia passed away and eventually Merrick Garland was put forward by the Obama administration, many of them said, well, look, we might not agree with all the judicial appointments by any future president, but if a Republican were to nominate someone reasonable, we would have to vote to confirm. And now, a year later, there are these same people who are indicating, by at least the early indications, that they will not vote for Judge Gorsuch. And they cite, many of them, the Merrick Garland was not given a vote. And there could be some tit for tat here going on where they say, look, you didn't give us a chance. And so Gorsuch becomes illegitimate in their eyes because this is a stolen seat.
Yeah, this strikes me as just an unfortunate turn that the nominations process has taken. There is a tit-for-tat element, and I'd like to think that in this nomination going forward, that senators of both parties will be able to put aside the tit-for-tat dynamic. Judge Gorsuch doesn't bear any responsibility for what happened to Judge Garland, this nomination, it's going to go forward. The Democrats are not in the majority in the Senate, so they're not in a position, as you say, to block the nomination. And it just sullying a public servant of Judge Gorsuch's caliber to make a political point about something that happened a year ago seems to me to really to be counterproductive, and ultimately, I think it deters people from being willing to enter into public service. Judge Gorsuch himself actually wrote about Judge Garland's initial nomination to the D.C. Circuit. He wrote an op-ed saying that it was a shame that one of the finest lawyers of his generation, speaking of Judge Garland, was being held up, and that the nomination process shouldn't be turned into a food fight. And I think the same is true today. Judge Gorsuch is one of the finest public servants and appellate court judges we have in the country, and hopefully Democratic senators will see their way to swiftly confirming him.
There were a few wild comments that I'm sure you read and I heard in the weeks preceding the pick, Tim, about how, well, we don't really know what Judge Gorsuch will do on the issue of life and Roe versus Wade because he never really had to tackle the issue directly. And so since there's a question mark there, he could be another disappointment in this arena, such as to many Anthony Kennedy or David Hackett Souter, who was there when I clerked for Justice Thomas. There are folks who were writing blogs about this and saying, well, he's a very smart guy. You can't take any chances on someone like a Judge Gorsuch versus a Judge Pryor, who, it was clear from the beginning that someone like a Pryor was going to would not likely rule in favor of upholding Roe, which for many conservatives is the be all and end all of any judicial selection for a Republican.
Sure, obviously that's right. As an appeals court judge, you take the issues that come before you. I will say, Judge Gorsuch wrote what was originally his doctoral dissertation. He has a doctorate in legal philosophy from Oxford on euthanasia, and I would suggest that anybody who has concerns about that might look at his book. And he writes quite powerfully in that book about the sanctity of human life and the need to protect every life. And so it's not exactly obviously the same context, but it is the same general issue. The importance of life and the importance that legal regimes in particular protect life. So I think although it's obviously a true statement that he hasn't addressed it as an appeals court judge, I think it's not fair to say that he's never written about it.
What about the issue of stare decisis? The left will say, well, Roe versus Wade is a law of the land, and as a matter of judicial conservatism, well, just overturning precedents and throwing the country into chaos is, that's also not called for. So that would be, so in other words, many judicial thinkers on the other side of the political aisle would say, well, that's the opposite of being conservative, because you're just as activist as anyone else for overturning, whether it be Roe or Webster, or, Casey versus Planned Parenthood, any of these cases.
Yeah, and Judge Gorsuch also just last year was a co-author with a number of other federal judges on a book on precedent, and so he takes precedent very seriously. Certainly, as an appeals court judge, his constant refrain to the clerks and the constant refrain in his opinions is the significance of the limited judicial role that appeals court judges bring to the task, both limited in the sense that they're limited by prior appeals court and Supreme Court precedent, and also, of course, by the democratic process, by the laws that Congress has passed. As a Supreme Court justice, the box is a little bit more open, and so. Obviously I don't know that I have any particular insight into how his views of precedents will evolve should he be confirmed to the court when he's no longer under the restrictions that an appeals court judge is under.
One of the things that the left does, and they did it going all the way back to Bork in 1987 when I just arrived in Washington. It was quite an arrival to watch the Bork hearings. And what do is they make complicated issues very simple to people through emotion. And I think a lot of people see through this now, Tim. We're talking to Tim Meyer, who clerked for Judge Gorsuch on the 10th Circuit, now a law professor. And this is what Nancy Pelosi, another of your favorites, this is also what she said.
What saddens me the most as a mom and a grandmother, though, is his hostility toward children in school, children with autism. He has ruled that they don't have the same rights under the IDEA, the children that they could reach their intellectual and social advancement under the law. He has said that doesn't apply to them.
What is she talking about there, Tim? And I mean, to me, it's like this should be Saturday Night Live, by the way. That should be a Saturday Night Live skit, but it'll never make it. What is she talking about, and why is she so off base?
I've heard that clip before. It's a curious clip. She's talking about the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, which is a federal statute that provides protections for disabled children. It requires school districts in certain circumstances to provide special services to students who are determined to have special needs. And it's a federal statute. So, Judge Gorsuch, like many judges, has been called upon to write opinions applying the statute. It is a notoriously vague statute and difficult to apply. It has huge financial ramifications for the school districts that are potentially required to, in some cases, they're required to pony up, enormous percentages of their budget just to assist one or two students, and so it's a really difficult statute for the courts to apply. It's a vague statute because Congress did not write it with any specificity, and Judge Gorsuch, like many judges, has been called upon to make some of these difficult decisions, and his decisions, I would say, are well within the mainstream of judges applying this statute, and of course. It is a statute. Sometimes when we talk about Supreme Court nominees, most of the time, really, what we're interested in is their view of the Constitution, because the Constitution, of course, trumps statutes. This is a statute. So to the extent that Leader Pelosi or Congress is unhappy with what the courts are doing, of course, Congress itself is is empowered to enact a more specific statute that would offer guidance to the courts and ultimately to school districts. And of course, Leader Pelosi is not in a position to do that right now. I think probably that is what really upsets.
Right. Well, so when the statute is not going her way, or whether it's ambiguous or ultimately decided that it's all overbroad or inapplicable to a set of facts, we'll clarify the statute. I think that's a great point. And you raise a good point, Tim, and that brings me to the separation of powers question. And I don't know did you dip into the Ninth Circuit oral argument at all yesterday? Did you hear any of that?
I followed it a little bit. I didn't get a chance to listen to the whole thing, but
well, it's just a precarious thing. I'll sum it up for you. It's a precarious thing, and I would say quite dangerous to have 3 unelected judges on a federal appellate court sit in judgment, in which they were yesterday, at least in their questioning, to weighing the merits of a president's consideration on national security matters. They're just not suited to do that. The way they were questioning the lawyer for the Justice Department, I think, who probably could have done a slightly better job on this. Like, well, what's your evidence that these 7 countries pose any greater risk than any other countries? And the guy who argued it's like, well, this has been a fast-moving process. Like, he didn't have a great answer on that. Yeah. But it just brought it back to the fore for me that unelected judges, as smart as they are, their role is not to make national security calls at all. That's not their role. And in fact, in this case, they kind of have to get into that mode to determine the underlying, underlying legitimacy of this stay that was put into place by the district court.
Yeah, it's a little bit odd posture, and I think certainly the government's lawyer got at this yesterday. That this is a temporary restraining order, and the question before the Ninth Circuit yesterday was just whether the stay should remain in effect while they sort out the merits. Now, I think as the sort of cards have fallen, and as people started to think about it a little more, you started to hear people like Jack Goldsmith and others say, that there actually is a fairly sound legal basis for at least large parts of the order. And what's been a little bit difficult about it is that in some sense the lack of consultation in rolling out the order, and then, as the lawyer for the Justice Department indicated yesterday, the extreme speed with which they have tried to have the ban overturned. And it was indeed, I thought, quite interesting, and that they seemed to almost blow by the question of just whether the temporary restraining order should be left in place, and instead go almost directly to the merits.
Bingo.
Yeah, a little bit odd rather than just addressing the narrow question of the TRO.
I have another question for you, Tim, because another one of my colleagues at the court, he clerked for Scalia and Thomas at the court. He said that the government, our government, the Justice Department actually could have gone directly to the Supreme Court on this issue without this going through the Ninth Circuit. And he said because of the exigency of the circumstances. Is that right? Is that possible? They could have gone right to the Supreme Court on the stay question?
I guess they could have petitioned the court, although I'm not sure the court would have. The court would have, I think, had discretion to say, you need to go through the Ninth Circuit first before you address this. Although the Ninth Circuit has indicated it's likely to rule, I think, very quickly, and so ultimately, I think we're going to end up in the same place. I think we'll end up at the court very quickly, regardless.
And Justice Kennedy he's in control of the Ninth Circuit cases of this nature, and we'll see if he sends it to the entire court or if he handles it on his own. It's great to talk to you, Tim Meyer. We need more law professors like Tim. What a great presentation of the facts. Tim, your students are lucky. Come back soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Best of luck. Former clerk for Judge Neil Gorsuch on The Laura Ingraham Show. Don't go away. 92% of left-wing activists live with their parents, and 1 in 3 is unemployed. A study of Berlin protesters finds. Well, come on. It's the same deal here. These are professional protesters, many of them, not all of them. Other ones just live with their parents, and it's better than getting a real job. Just show up with these pre-printed posters and light up a joint and have a good time.